to the Isles of Scilly Health and Wellbeing Board meeting on Thursday. To the Isles of Scilly Health and Wellbeing Board meeting on Thursday the 4th of December. Before moving into the agenda, I thought it might just be helpful if we could swing around the room on St Mary's and also on the screen just to introduce ourselves and the roles we're representing today. So I'm Joel Williams, I'm Vice Chair of Council, Lead Member for Children, and since our last meeting, Fran Grottick, who was chairing the meeting, has retired from her role as Lead Member for Children. I've taken that role on, and in that capacity, I am chairing this meeting. Over to you, Avril.
Avril Montford, I'm the Lead Member for Adults. I'm Chairman of Scrutiny.
Steve Manning, Chairman of Health Watch Isles of Scilly.
My name is Pickler Roy Chowdhury, but most people call me Roy. I'm the Interim Head of Children Social Care, and I'm here representing Sue.
Thank you. Katie, would you like to lead on-screen representation, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Apologies, I'm not in the room in person. I will be in future, just couldn't make this one. So I'm Katie Ash. I'm the Director of Public Health for the Isles of Scilly and Assistant Director of Public Health for Cornwall. And if I hand over to Scott.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks, colleagues. Scott Bradley, I am the Policing Commander for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. Thank you for the invitation.
And Lucy.
Hello, good morning all. My name is Lucy Walsh. I'm an Advanced Public Health Specialist in the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Public Health team.
Ben.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Seamarks. I'm the Partnership Board Fund Strategic Commissioner Lead for Cornwall Council, here today to update you on the Better Care Fund.
Thanks, Ben. Paula.
Morning, everyone. I'm also a Advanced Public Health Specialist in a Public Health team with a focus on public mental health and suicide prevention.
Thanks, Paula. Beth.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Advanced Strategic Intelligence Analyst for Public Health in Cornwall Council. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Beth. And Juliet.
Hi, I'm Juliet Ferris. I'm the Place Director. I'm hosted in CFT, but I'm actually a system appointment. So I'm here also representing the ICB, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly NHS ICB.
That's everyone, Joel.
Thank you and welcome. I'll try and keep an eye out for hands up on screen. If I do miss them, please just shout and I'll bring you into the conversation. If we move on to the formal agenda, we've got item 1, which is declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest, please? I can't see any hands up here or on screen. Agenda item 2 is minutes of previous meeting, which was held on the 13th of October 2025. Are we happy to accept those as a true and accurate record of that meeting? Or is there any feedback people would wish to give?
I propose that we accept the minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Do I have a seconder for the minutes, please? Thank you very much, Roy. Thank you. They're seconded and carried forward. Agenda item 3 is urgent items. I have no urgent items to bring to the meeting, which brings us on to part 1 of our agenda, which is the Director of Public Health Annual Report, which I assume, Katie, you're going to kick off on.
I'm really pleased to bring the Director of Public Health report to you today. Lucy's going to actually do the presentation, and Lucy did an enormous amount of the work in the team. But just to give our many shared themes, this will take you through what we found. There are many shared themes. What we did really try to do through this report was also try to highlight what is specific to the Isles of Scilly. So Lucy, are you happy to present? Lucy, you're on mute.
Yeah, just make sure I've included the sound. So
thank you.
Can everyone see that the first title page?
We can, yes.
Yeah, great, thank you. And so yeah, thank you for welcoming us here today. And as Katie mentioned, so this report was the topic of a Director of Public Health report is a statutory annual function to shine a light on a specific topic, challenge around the health and well-being of our community. And in collaboration with our colleagues in both Children's Services with Council, the Isles of Scilly and Cornwall Council, we joined together with the to focus on child poverty. And again, this is all in the report, so it would save plenty of time for discussion and question. But we worked really hard to ensure that this report was both had that quantitative data, that robustness in terms of numbers, but also, as I'll come on to, the focus was actually really about the qualitative element of exploring child poverty, to really give context and a living experience of these figures. We work really hard, and my colleague Beth is on the call as well, around data and acknowledging the caveats and some of the challenges around data that really gives a true picture of the Isles of Scilly, and how we are also balancing that with protecting kind of confidentiality and the sensitivity. But we are able to really consider some of the data across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly as a whole. And again, for us, as the slide is showing, we've got 1 in 5 children aged 0 to 19 in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly living in relative poverty. And this is the second highest rate in the southwest. And another key factor, again, for both Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, was that this isn't an issue of worklessness. We have 7 in 10 children who are living in relative poverty and have at least one working parent. So for us, this is a really important message that we use in terms of our service design and our framing of the messaging. This slide here again is just more of kind of some of the outcomes that we may already kind of assume or know about, but what does it really mean living in relative poverty for your health and well-being? So exploring both kind of physical impacts on our children's physical health and our children's mental health. And again, this is all explored in the report. But what we're looking at particularly is where there is that inequity and in our relationships or in our environment and our society that causes these health inequalities, which are unfair and are avoidable. But as I mentioned, the aim of this report was also to really kind of explore the richness of the stories that we have been privileged to hear from our babies, children, young people across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and to also bear witness to their experiences of poverty, and for us to explore what it means to them, that, you know, what does poverty mean to you? And so that has been a privileged part of this. And to do that, we adopted a very creative microgrant approach where we actually went out, provided a resource in terms of funding to ask our voluntary community sector organisations who have that embedded relationship and trust with our families and to explore the topic of poverty. And it is incredibly flexible. You know, we wanted them to tell us what the issue is rather than us to really set kind of a template. We needed to hear what was happening in the communities, in the lives of our families. And we were, you know, hugely privileged to have an incredibly creative feedback. And also part of this, we also explored the thoughts of our CYP, children, young people and babies workforces. And that could be anything from our health sector, so our social care sector, colleagues in teaching, youth work, you know, how is poverty in their eyes, you know, when affecting their job of really supporting our children and young people. And finally, what came, you know, as a real focus for us is making sure that we consider children's rights and how that actually supports our kind of framing of poverty and will help and will, as we're seeing, will really drive forward our future actions. So as I mentioned, it was the microgrants that allowed creativity, innovation in terms of how the experience of poverty was presented through a variety of different mediums. And so, as you will see in the report, we have a incredible artwork, poetry, traditional quotes and stories, but it really did create a fantastic kind of body of evidence that we were able to robustly analyse through academic driven thematic analysis. So it wasn't just picking things that we thought were particularly interested. We really went through very systematically, what is this telling us and how does that fit into themes that we can actually move forward with. Just a little snapshot there of some of the, you know, the artwork and yeah, as I said, I really would encourage you to explore the report. And also there's a link in the report and on this slide. We had so much content that we couldn't put it all in the report. So we very much we've created a web page with all of the content, and that does, I can assure you, include feedback from your residents on the islands. So what we just want to focus on today was, again, specifically, we absolutely acknowledge that for our research generally around island communities demonstrates that poverty is experienced differently. And so what we were looking at was actually, can we really hear that? What's the reality of that for the Isles of Scilly? And then using that, we can then create actions that look to reduce and mitigate the impact. And I really appreciate none of this will come as a surprise to you, but for us, it was able to really demonstrate it in the voices of those people having that lived and living experience. And again, they are a unique set of challenges. The geographical isolation, seasonal economy, limited but still very committed and passionate infrastructure and workforces. It clearly increases the cost of living, and a real challenge and difficult access to those essential services that can mitigate that impact of poverty and that are there to promote and create health. Fuel and food poverty particularly were highlighted, and I think just one of some of the quotes there about how that's actually experienced. So it's easy for us to say, oh, it costs more, but actually, how does that feel? And then that we can see that those factors then impact people's physical health, their social health, and their emotional health and well-being, in terms of certainly feeling a stigma around not being able to access things that they would like to. We covered just one of the things we're very proud of was that rather than just lump babies and children and young people all together, we actually explored within the life stage, giving space to each of the different kind of ages. So making sure that we don't just forget about babies. We think about our preschool children and school age. And we've really noticed that, yes, there's common themes throughout these life stages, but they're experienced very differently depending on the age of the child. And that is crucial for us to understand as we look to make actions moving forward and to design policies and design services. And one just to highlight there, which has been, we were incredibly well supported to explore the experience of babies and non-verbal children through a very fantastic evidence-based approach where colleagues in the community, voluntary community sector, take part in observations and then it kind of craft as if the baby could speak. And actually it's given us a real insight, including babies still in the womb. And again, I don't think we're here to say something that you wouldn't expect, but what we've been able to do is look at that national evidence base, address the key themes locally, but evidence them and display and kind of demonstrate what it's like here in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So the report explores these themes, and again, there is a section dedicated to the Isles of Scilly and just references some of those specific nuanced elements. But I think for us, a core reflection is that poverty, the themes are broad and they're deep. They're really there isn't one service across the system that we feel doesn't have some kind of experience of the impact of poverty, that they're of course all interconnected, and as we've demonstrated, as the child grows, the themes and the impact grows. But also for us, the report was a real reminder that poverty impacts the child's now, so their experience today, their happiness, their opportunities, but it really also impacts their future. So it lays, physical, social, emotion foundations that can affect their into adolescence and into adulthood. And if you have just a couple of minutes, I will just, if that's okay, Katie, we'll just play what happened. We created recommendations, as you would expect a DPH report to do. But actually, the most powerful element was that we were able to draw on the themes that we heard and create an open letter, which reflects the voices of our babies, children and young people. And so I will just, fingers crossed.
To everyone who plays a part in our lives, we are the future of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. Some of us are still learning to walk and talk. Some of us are navigating school, friendships, and growing up. Some of us are preparing for our futures, dreaming of what we might become, but many of us are doing all of this while living in poverty. We want you to know what that feels like.
It feels like going to bed hungry and waking up cold. It feels like wearing shoes that don't fit, uniforms that don't match. It feels like missing out on school trips, birthday parties, and swimming lessons. It feels like watching our parents worry and knowing before we should that money is tight. It feels like being left out.
We know our parents are trying their best. We see them skipping meals so we can eat. We hear them on the phone trying to get help. We feel their stress when the bills come in. We know they love us. We want to grow up healthy and happy. We want to play, learn, and dream big. But poverty makes everything harder. It makes it harder to concentrate at school, to feel confident, to feel like we belong. It makes us feel ashamed, even though we've done nothing wrong.
As we get older, we start to understand more. We see how poverty shapes our choices. Some of us miss school because we don't have the right shoes, equipment, or period products. Some of us struggle to get to college because we can't afford travel costs. Some of us miss out on sports or clubs because they cost too much or are not for us. Some of us feel like we'll never be able to afford a home here, in the place we love. Some of us feel like we have to leave Cornwall or the Isles of Scilly to have a future. We want people to understand that poverty looks different in different places. On the Isles of Scilly, it means expensive food and unreliable transport. It means fewer services, fewer choices, and sometimes feeling forgotten.
We don't want pity. We want change. We want every child to have enough food, warm clothes, and a safe home. We want schools to understand that not everyone can afford the same things. We want travel that is affordable and runs often so we can get to school, college, or the beach. We want support for our parents so they don't have to choose between heating and eating. We want to be listened to, not just in reports, but in real decisions.
We're not just statistics, we're your future. Please don't let poverty decide who we become. Help us build a Cornwall and Isles of Scilly where every child can thrive, not just survive. With hope, the babies, children and young people of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly.
To everyone.
Thank you. So as I said, that for us is, is as important as the more full, more kind of specific recommendations, which I have summarized on the next two slides. But I think it will leave time for discussion. I think the key thing with our recommendations is that we've kind of started to frame them based on the audience who would be best positioned and able to support us in our aspiration to reduce and mitigate the impact of child poverty. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you.
I hope you're all still there because I couldn't see anyone during that. So, yeah,
Thanks, Lucy. The room is still there. So yeah. Joel, I also have the video that was done on the Five Islands Academy. I don't know if it's nearly 7 minutes long. I don't know whether you want me to play the introduction to it or whether you just want us to share the link to that report. What works best?
I would like us to spend a lot of time discussing poverty, so I've got no issue if we can we spare 7 minutes to. I think the nods around the room are. Let's.
Shall I start? I mean, I think it's important, isn't it? We've asked people their opinions. I think it's important if we've got time to hear them. So yes. Just bear with me because I have to make sure I share in the right way. So I'm attempting to be. Goodness, it's saying it can't share. Sorry, I'm having technical issues. There we go. So this is available on a website. Can you hear that?
I can't see anything yet shared, Katie.
Bear with, sorry. Note to self, let Lucy do the sharing. Okay, I think I've got it this time.
Yeah, that's good. That's it. Thanks.
A time that was unfair made me feel lonely, isolated.
Like left out, ignored.
Disrespected.
Time unfair made me feel angry and annoyed.
Feel like I wasn't being listened to.
I felt really upset and excluded. Things were really unfair. I felt hopeless and frustrated.
We don't have the same access to like clothes and shoes.
It's not fair because everything's expensive and all the visitors are quite rude about our island. It makes me feel like angry and annoyed because just because we've got a small island doesn't mean we have less rights than people with like massive islands, like cities and stuff.
On the islands there isn't much to do. It's also saying that you have to go to the mainland to go to college because there isn't a college on the island. It wouldn't be viable, but it isn't necessarily equal opportunity.
I really like living on Scilly, and I love all like the beaches that you can be close to the sea, so you can always like go for a swim. But in the summer there are a lot of tourists and it can get quite crowded sometimes.
Well, I have to go to Mundersley every Monday and then go back every Friday. So I have to wake up early on Mondays and rush down to the quay on Fridays.
This one got brand new shoes because like they needed some because theirs were like really dirty, and this one his shoes used to be white, but now he's had them for so long that they've turned like a black and stuff, and all of his friends have like just white shiny new shoes, but he's the only one with black dirty shoes, and so now he's just really sad and he's feeling very left out.
Her name's Edia and her mum works a lot and her dad lives in a different country, and she doesn't get to see her dad because her mum and her dad can't afford it, and she's saying, I don't think it's fair how expensive food is over here, and at school we don't get served a lot of food and it is really expensive, and my mum doesn't have enough money or time to make me a packed lunch.
And how does Edia feel about that?
She's upset.
Sometimes not everyone gets holidays because of expensive of going around places.
The person feels like they just can't be themselves. They want to, but it's just like they're too scared to actually express themselves in their own way. They crumple under like social anxiety and what it's like to be themselves.
Put fun and happy on them to say that most people have fun lives and happy lives, but not everyone has happy lives and fun lives, and not everyone can afford loads of different stuff, but most people can, but not everyone.
Does living on the Isles of Scilly make it harder to afford certain things?
Yes, because it's hard to get them over here, and it makes it a lot harder for everyone to like not share everything, but like get everything they need. Because in the charity shop we've got a food bank where you can just donate food that you don't need and give it to people.
Any holiday homes?
Okay.
Yeah, way too many holidays. There's not enough actual homes for
There's not enough homes for locals to live in. Yeah.
It's not really a place to start a family when there's so much expense that's additional to the mainland. And housing is very limited and in size. Jobs are quite limited and the pay doesn't really support the prices of stuff over here. Can make this guy feel a bit unhappy because he can't pay, if he's got a family, he can't support his family properly, even if he's working more than one job.
there aren't many houses on the islands and more people.
There is more behind a smile on someone's face. They might have things going on that you don't know about. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Actually, they've got really tough things going on because their family doesn't have much money, but nobody knows because they always wear a smile even though they're not feeling happy.
And is there something that other people could do to help this person?
Other people could ask if it's okay, but the only way they could help is if he takes off his smile and tells people what's actually happening.
I'll take that down. So I think just welcome. I think that kind of gives you an overview of everything that was done. And I think Lucy highlighted we worked with some brilliant partners who did a really good job of working with our children and young people to hear what they had to say. And I think that's a really good example. So Joel, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just welcome Councillor John Peacock. He's joined us in the chamber. I might say a few words. I was very grateful to see that. I think the report talks about food poverty, transport poverty, fuel poverty, which are particularly relevant to our island context. Particularly at this time of year, transport costs are expensive without the scheduled boat running to the mainland. So for a family of four, we're talking £1,000 return to get to the mainland for whatever activity they're going to. Food poverty for me is one issue, but it's also access to food. Sometimes it's not the case that the food is expensive, it's not even on the shelves for us to buy, so that sort of fits into what we're talking about here. Fuel poverty has been a challenge for us for many years, and perhaps we can touch on that. But I would just like to throw open a discussion, but I'd be really keen to hear what we can do in the short, medium, long term, what we can do to try and mitigate, alleviate, try and make some of the themes which have been identified in this report not there in 15, 20 years if we sort of sit down again. So I can see Councillor Peacock's got his red light on, so I'll bring him into the discussion first.
Yeah, first of all, apologies for attending late to the meeting. I had an important meeting just before this one, which I won't go into now. A couple of things that hit me straight from the video, and it's quite interesting because I've not been in this space at all. I'm new to the whole health and wellbeing scenario. I am a councillor for Cordon Partridge Trust, so I do have some background, but I think for me, you look holistically into the islands and you make the assumption that we're a holiday destination. Everybody's really well off. You see all the lovely cars flying around. Every other car over here is a new car, you know, on the roads almost. It seems to be like they are. And I think the power of that video is quite startling. And my first question really, is the distribution of the video and because I would like that video to be used much wider than obviously in this scenario. And I don't know, because I think I would even make a proposal now that gets played to full council, because we make...
It's on the agenda to come.
Yeah, we make quite strong decisions as a council at the minute, and a lot of them are around budgetary at this time of year, but also other aspects as well. And I think we personally, up to this point, have never considered the voice of the child in those considerations. It comes to the council quite often, but until you actually hear that sort of video, you don't connect at all. And I think the power of that video is incredible. And I back everything that Joel said, you know, about poverty over here. We're well aware, and for me, it's finding easy solutions. I mean, is there a food bank on the island? I don't know. There is.
Yeah, there's at the charity shop there is, you know, you can, if you've got tins of food in your own house, and I believe the co-op used to take a lot of stuff up there, but actually only yesterday someone came to see me and they were concerned because there hasn't been anything in there lately. So I think it's, whether it's because they've been having some work done there and people haven't been in since, the door I think is now open. Perhaps you know a bit more about it, do you?
Sorry. Well, having gone into the charity shop and looked at the shelving there, the message on the shelving seems to be different now. It seems to be the fact that if you've got food coming near a sell-by date or use by date, and you're not going to use it, you put it there. But it then just says, anybody help yourself. It doesn't say that it's for the less well off. And I've noticed some, I think there's some people staying here for the winter who would seem to be quite well off, who are helping themselves quite happily to stuff.
I think there is I went into the charity shop and there isn't a huge amount there. I think the Co-op used to do it. I don't think they do that anymore. So there is a gap. There is, without a question, there is a gap. And what was there I went there last week. What was there was absolutely not what we would call, in any stretch of the imagination, a food bank. It isn't. It's just 3 or 4 stuff that's on the shelf as you go in. So no, it isn't in reality. Nothing's there at this moment. You know.
It started off quite well, but it seems to have just vanished.
I'm conscious from a strategic point of view. We're currently working on a corporate plan. We're working on a children's plan. I guess we've got to make sure that the theme of poverty, some of the solutions to try to resolve the challenges are captured in those 2 documents. I think there's a responsibility on us as members and other people involved in those documents to make sure that's captured. I can see another hand up on the screen.
Yeah, hi. Again, apologies. I arrived late, and I think some people don't know me. I'm Chris Reed, Chief Medical Officer for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly ICB. I just wanted to just say a few things because I really welcome the report. Thanks to Katie and the team. I think we're all passionate about addressing health inequalities, inequities, and childhood poverty is such an important thing to address because it shouldn't be an issue is the first thing, but it is. And I just link to some of the conversations I've heard. Obviously, the reality is, and I'm just reflecting on my experience living in New Zealand for 17 years, where I also provided and set up the medical care for Pitcairn Island. So when you talk about rural communities, I think Pitcairn is the most isolated, I think, in the world. The challenges, therefore, you either have challenges of poverty or you have because it's always going to be expensive and far more expensive to provide services. So my question is, when you see this, is how do we prioritize what we want to do in terms of addressing this, in terms of the limited funds we have, in other words, targeted, what's called proportionate universalism. So instead of saying it's the same for everyone, do we target families and offer them subsidized travel? Someone mentioned how expensive it is to travel. Do we offer? And I think that's a decision that you, as you say, you have to strategically make. And I think finally, it's that community culture, isn't it? Of how does everyone take responsibility for this? That this should be a no without creating sort of a divergence in the community. So I think, yeah, how do you target this in terms of proportionate is my question to consider to take forward.
I think there's a really good opportunity at this moment. As most of you may know, that we're going through nationally in a children's social care reform in terms of early help, early support, and all of that. That fits nicely in there. But one of the problems that we do have in there is the funding. It isn't available. It's things that social care is getting. Social care is not getting money from the government. What they're getting is very limited. So it's not something that social care alone can do that. But I think this is a great opportunity to pull our resources, and I can only point out what I think. Pull our resources with health, with our other partners and the council to be able to do something. But do something. This is the right time, because there is a bigger agenda that's going on, but that fits nicely into it. What that solution is, I'm just putting that this is a right opportunity to do something, and this is the time to do something if we're going to do something.
Steve, come through, come on.
Yes, Andrew George, our local MP, posted something on Facebook in the last couple of days about approaching the government for general funding to support the islands. And I made the comment here that I made there on that. That basically, I believe we're the only islands in the whole of Europe which don't get any subsidy whatsoever. Why this is historically happened, I don't know. Whether it's because the Duchy of Cornwall was involved and they think that, you know, everything's okay, I have no idea. But we really should. You see the Scottish Islands and Highlands and the support they get, and the total lack of support for this community. I think this is, I mean, it wouldn't answer everything, but it would help a lot.
We'll take the guy on the screen.
Yeah, people on the screen. I'm afraid I don't know names.
It's Scott first, Joel, and then me.
If you'd like to come in. Scott, if you'd like to come in, please, first.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations from me. So for those who joined late, Scott Bradley, Policing Commander for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. The other hat I wear in that space, of course, is as one of the statutory partners in the Working Together space to safeguard children. And I'm actually the chair of the delegated safeguarding leads in that space as well. So an observation and then, well, they're both kind of observation. An observation and a suggestion, probably best way to frame it. Observation first and foremost is just how well you've encapsulated the voice of the child in those products. We're often in the DSP space having conversations about whether or not we've looked at things with that lens, and that comes across really strongly in this, and you should be commended for it, for all those who've contributed to it. That's a cracking bit of work. It's really powerful stuff. Forgive me, as an outsider to the islands, I'll just make a reflection stroke suggestion. It strikes me, as has been touched on by a couple of colleagues on the call already, that from an outsider from the island, some of these key messages and the poverty topic is probably one that you would assume doesn't exist, or perhaps doesn't exist to the degree that it evidently does. And I wonder how you tap into the visiting tourists to the island. If I use the terminology, and forgive me if it causes offence to anyone, but in a way that we can pull at the heartstrings and shine a light on the challenge, and also signpost them as to what they could do to assist the cause, if you like. The touch there in terms of food banks is an interesting one, isn't it? There isn't an Airbnb or some form of self-catering tourist venue that doesn't end up with unused food in the cupboards at the end of somebody's stay somewhere, some of which gets taken, some gets left in the hope that somebody will make use of it after. I just wonder if we had an opportunity to tap into those individuals visiting the island to say, if you've got any unused food, this is what you could do with it, accepting the the use by dates and all that separate things is something that needs to be given some thought to. But just a thought there in terms of how do we make visitors to the island understand this challenge in a way that makes them want to do something to help fix it. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Katie, your hand is up.
Thank you, Joel. So a couple of points from me. One is around, I think, I can't remember who mentioned it, but somebody did highlight the potential link to the Children and Young People's Plan. And I do think that is probably the right space for us to pick up on the actions that come out of this. So we are working really closely with the development of the Children and Young People's Plan. We've been doing quite a lot of the work on how do we capture the intelligence that we need to understand what the issues are. And I think we can take forward some of that and what do we do about it for the Isles of Scilly through that piece of work. That feels like the right way to do it. And then I just also wanted to pick up on the funding point. So I've been contacted by, I think it's Sheffield Hallam University, who are doing a piece of research looking at funding, local authority funding, and where it is unequal. So I have made myself available for that interview. I don't know a huge amount about it at the moment, but it could potentially be something that would be really helpful evidence for us as part of that conversation. So if anybody's got anything they want to sort of send my way that they feel like I should be aware of before I do that interview, I'd be really happy to kind of hear your views.
Thank you. And I think Councillor Peacock raised the point about making sure we amplify this by bringing it to full council. And I think it's in the work plan to do so. I'm not sure what the date when we're expecting it to come to full council, but if it's not on the work plan, I think you and I can make sure that it does get on the full council agenda before early next year, probably now.
Yeah, I think it is on the agenda.
I think it is.
And Lucy's got her hand up as well, Joel. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, go ahead, Lucy, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. It was just regarding what you mentioned there, and just it would be great to continue to work with you in terms of both the safeguarding and we mentioned a lot around the impact of poverty on physical, emotional, social health, but we were again listening to what we heard was a great link, a really insightful piece around its links to exploitation and introduction to crime as a means of mitigating the challenge of poverty. And that was certainly something that came out as a strong theme, which I've started to, we can discuss further with our Children's Safeguarding Partnership, but particularly the link to exploitation and some quite kind of really interesting nuanced kind of entrepreneurialism from our young people to try and mitigate the effects of poverty on behalf of them and their families. So not that I'm supporting the criminal behaviour, but actually we're talking about stealing sanitary products, hygiene products, actually engaging in activity that creates money, such as dealing vapes. So the premise behind it is, and the reason is to provide money for their family. But obviously we're it's a fine balance, but it was often driven by this need to meet the basic needs. Yeah, and I'll just clarify on that point, that was across the whole of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, just so that you don't think that that's an issue specific to the islands.
Thank you, Councillor Peacock.
Apologies, again, there's lots going on in my life at the moment. I've not actually read the report in full, so if the question I'm about to ask has been answered in the report, please shout me down. But do we have any raw statistics? It's very easy for us to use anecdotal evidence, and I'm not going to say that video is anecdotal evidence, but it's very easy for us to use anecdotal evidence and say X, Y, Z, is a real problem. For me, if I can stand in front of a politician away from here, if I'm over away, and I can say 25% of children in the Isles of Scilly are in poverty, that's a strong statement. I'm not saying, I'm just making a figure up. So I think for me, and apologies if it is already in the report, but I think actually having a raw headline statistic on this one would be really powerful. And then we can ram that message home, certainly the members here, at full council and elsewhere, because I think for me, it's startling. It's not something, again, I come back to my point, it's not something I've ever considered, particularly, because it is significantly hidden, especially as 95% of our income comes from tourism.
Katie wants to come.
I can answer that if you'd like, Joel.
Katie.
We can give the figures for poverty for the Isles of Scilly. What often happens for the Isles of Scilly is that when you get to sort of population level statistics, it becomes very difficult to do that for the Isles of Scilly because of the small numbers. We can for poverty. What I would say is, though, poverty looks very different on the island. So if you were to use the measures of relative or absolute poverty that are used nationally, you are not going to see lots of children on the islands coming up in those figures because they're about median income. What we know is that it's more expensive to live on the islands than it is to live on the mainland. And that's where you see the difference. So that in this instance, the statistics are not very useful, Councillor Peacock. They are, they don't tell the true picture. And that is why we try to bring the living experience of people into this report, because it will feel different. If you're living in Camborne and you've got a Lidl next door to you and you can do all your family shopping there, it's going to feel very different than if you're needing to pay the prices that people would pay on the islands. So your income just will not go as far.
Yeah, no. If I may come back, that was my point exactly, because I'm well aware. I think there was a recent government report came out and we were sort of the most affluent place in the country. When you're trying to fight this cause, that's going to be quite challenging, was the point I was trying to make.
Can I just added dimension to all of this is that obviously the Scilly Isles becomes more isolated over the winter period, and the poverty is actually greater during that period. It is because the population is very small. it triples during the summer period and everything else, and there's more stuff going back and forth. But winter period is the hardest of all for the residents and especially for the children as well, because that's the time that things doesn't happen. Boat doesn't turn up, food doesn't turn up. There was no fresh vegetable for a week last week. And so on and so on.
Yep. Yep. For me, there's also the point about the sort of cycle of poverty, which is touched on in this report, and how a child brought up in poverty is likely to be a parent bringing up their children in poverty. I'm also concerned about the impact of physical and mental health on poverty. We're touching more about that later on the agenda, but it's picked up in this report. So it's how poverty just plays out in so many negative ways for children, families, that again, I think as local leaders, decision makers, we just need to be very mindful of. Any more contributions people would like to make?
Do you think it would be worth asking our farmers on the island whether they would donate some of their fresh vegetables to the community shop? Or, I mean, I think you're always going to get people who are going to abuse it, whatever you do. But if there was a notice up, please don't take this if you can afford to go and buy it.
Trouble is that I don't think farmers on the islands produce much fruit and veg. It's mainly flowers.
Yeah.
So you can't, and not be rude, but you can't live on flowers. It's not as though you were in Cornwall where they were producing cauliflowers and goodness knows what else. But that's not, I don't think that's really, and not be rude, a viable.
I think there might be more food in there in the summer, because I think a lot of visitors did take their leftovers up there that were left at the end, but there's never a great amount of stuff in there. The other thing I was thinking about, I mean, if somebody would be prepared to work with children's services, I know we can't know who the families are that are struggling, but whether there could be a collection from the public to do some hampers for those families, so that the children's services could give them out rather than, or is that a difficult one to do for confidentiality?
I think those things we can take it outside and we can have a discussion, but I don't, for our purpose, for the discussion over here, I think we need to think bigger.
Yes.
I know, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
I understand. I'm just
basis.
thinking of the immediate thing with Christmas coming up.
And
people do collections for other children abroad, and we forget about our own that are in need.
Maybe we can talk to Co-op as well. And
yeah.
We can do some,
No,
those kind of things.
I totally agree. I think some of that is taking place. So I'm with another hat on. I wear far too many hats. We've got the Isles of Scilly Charitable Trust. We work with children's social care and adult social care to get recommendations, and we give relatively small amounts of money at Christmas. We're talking a few £100, so it's not life-changing, but it's timely and useful. So absolutely, I think those sort of conversations can take place. Chris, is it Chris? I think your hand is up.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, sorry. Can I just, and maybe it might be something for Katie to answer, but if I can start off by saying that the challenges of remote island living, in effect, I think gives you an opportunity to truly address childhood poverty, because you've got low numbers. And I'll just put a caveat in. I presume most of childhood poverty on the island is long-term residents. I don't know if there's much of a transient population that this would also have an implication on in terms of people who come to work and bring their families. I don't know the answer to that. But my question is, Katie, presumably we can, as of all places, we should be able to identify the children in poverty on the island, and therefore, to me, there's a real opportunity. Noting there's also variance, there's wealth on the island as well as poverty. So it's in your gift to address this, because the numbers are relatively small, as if you take a proportionate way of addressing this. So, but it would be around. I presume it wouldn't be too difficult, Katie, or would it be, to identify the actual families?
I don't think there's an easy way of kind of doing a blanket which children are living under a certain percentage of the median income. No to that answer. But what I would say, and what we've been thinking about through the Children and Young People's Plan, is that there are, you know, the number of children on the Isles of Scilly is a knowable, quantifiable amount of children, and the strength of the community is that people do know each other. What that means in terms of what you might do to address poverty, I think, is the interesting question there, Chris. So what could be done a little bit differently, and is maybe a little bit more systemic than just food, because this obviously food is an issue, but there's fuel poverty, and there are some of the other things that I thought were interesting is how the children on the island see their potential adult lives, what it might be like to find work, to buy a house, those sorts of things. Those are bigger issues. Those are much harder to solve. So I think yes and no, Chris, but I like your thinking, and I do think that is the direction that we should be thinking in.
So if I now put my strategic hat on and zoom out, the council are currently discussing with central government around funding. We're aware of this. I would very much like this to feed into that discussion. Part of those discussions around the high cost of travel, but for me, it's actually the high cost of freight to the islands that's the issue here, which will skew the cost of, you know, and it's even worse, you know, we recently moved to St Mary's, but before that we lived on St Agnes, and you know, the cost of food on St Agnes is absolutely astronomical. You know, I think you're looking at, you know, almost 3 times the cost for certain items you could certainly buy in Lidl in Camborne. You know, it would be significantly more. I think it's a massive job to do researching that. And it's all very anecdotal, and I think it probably needs to stay anecdotal. But we just need to make sure from everybody around the table that we feed at the highest level this into those discussions with central government, because I think it's very easy to sit back and say you're a holiday destination, you haven't got a problem, we'll go on holiday all the time, happy days. We know we have a lot of people come to these islands on holiday from the southeast of England, and they get a very, very, very skewed view of what it's like to live here, because they only come for a week or 2 weeks at the most, and they don't know what it's like to be sitting here in the middle of Christmas when how am I going to pay for my food? How am I going to pay for my electricity? And all these issues that people have, but are very much, well, of course there isn't a problem, because it's a lovely place where you live. And that's what you always get told. And this isn't, we've got to break that barrier down.
Thank you for that. I can't see any further lights on, so Roy.
Just to add to your complexity at the moment, because there is a huge agenda around local authority reform, and that funding obviously plays massively into that, and obviously Scillies are in a very difficult position in that remit. So I'm just putting in that is an additional complexity that we'll have to face in terms of funding, because the local authority reform, you know, Isles of Scilly doesn't yeah, just a complexity I'm just putting in there.
So we have 2 formal recommendations, but I think in addition, I'm not going to propose them as formal recommendations. I think I'd word them as commitments. I think as commitments, we as individuals and partners will aim to get this paper on the full council agenda for discussion in a wider forum before too long. We will commit to making sure it's part of the Children and Young People's Plan's development, and we will commit to just being mindful of raising it in opportune moments to make sure we keep lobbying and presenting the sort of causes and impact of poverty on Scilly. I think they were the main commitments I can think of. But in terms of recommendations, we got recommendation 1 that members endorse the content of the annual report from the Director of Public Health. Recommendation 2 that members note and support the recommendations of the Director of Public Health's annual report. Do I have a proposer and seconder within the room? Proposed by Councillor Peacock, seconded by Councillor Mumford. So thank you everybody who contributed to that discussion. I think we'll be mindful of it going forward. The next report is the Pharmaceutical Needs Assessment.
Great, that's me. Hi everyone. Beth Simons, Advanced Strategic Intelligence Analyst at Cornwall Council. I've just got some slides, but I'll try and skip through them quite quickly so that we've got time for discussions. So let me know when you can see them.
We can see them now.
Great, and I hope that's okay for everyone online as well. Cool. So, yes, the pharmaceutical needs assessment for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So the purpose really of this today is just to present a summary of the findings. It is quite a dense report, so hopefully this will just pull out the headlines for you, and seek support of the P&A recommendations to enable publication before the statutory deadline. So just a quick overview for anyone that's not familiar with a pharmaceutical needs assessment, which is a P&A, an acronym. I'll say that now to sort of avoid trying to trip over the entire phrase, but this is a statutory requirement that's published every 3 years. So under the health and requirements of the Health and Social Care Act, every single Health and Wellbeing Board has to publish one of these. What it is a gap analysis of pharmacy service provision, looking at the health needs and inequalities of communities. It's designed to be a kind of planning and commissioning tool for NHS bodies, the Integrated Care Board and council teams. So for example, any services that are commissioned through pharmacies, such as community drug and alcohol services, understanding where they are and where there might be gaps. It serves as a kind of central resource for pharmacy provision in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. It's the only report that is produced that looks solely at pharmacy. But I really want to highlight that bottom point there. It does have a primary purpose that's set out in legislation, and it is designed to provide what's called the basis for market entry decisions. So this is for pharmaceutical contractors, so your high street pharmacies, your Boots, your independent providers, whoever it is. They have to, if they want to open a pharmacy, they have to apply to be included on something called the pharmaceutical list. And the applications to be included on that list must align with an identified need set out within the P&A. So that's really the primary purpose of it. So just a little bit about how it was involved and how it's conducted. The P&A development over the past few months was overseen by a steering group. The list of all the members is in the report, but it did include people from Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, so pharmacy experts, and also Plymouth, recognising that we have cross-border access to pharmacy services in the east of Cornwall. We are quite bound by the Department of Health and Social Care guidelines on the P&A. This is not a great process, I would say, for rural locations. It is particularly not great for islands off the, that are geographically remote and have challenges with access to services. So I'm just going to say that now. I think there's some MP up in Somerset who's currently raising issues with the overall process in Parliament. So it is noted that it's not a great process. But what the guidelines recommend is that what the guidelines state is that you have to articulate different types of gaps. So these are geographical gaps. So this is need for a new pharmacy premises based on travel times, using a Department of Health and Social Care tool called SHAPE. You can articulate gaps in terms of securing improvements or better access for your communities. So this might be that you want additional service provision, or that you're looking at areas of high health needs where actually having extended opening hours, for example, would be beneficial for your communities. There's also a mandatory 60-day consultation period. We received feedback from the Isles of Scilly, and the steering group went through all of the feedback from that consultation and addressed it in the final report. And just to say that military and hospital pharmacies are out of scope, it's more relevant, I think, for the mainland, but just to flag that out. We do look at PCN level, primary care network level, but we have split out the Isles of Scilly within the Isles of Scilly and South Carrier primary care network pharmacy profile, recognising that just because your pharmacy might be closed one day on the Isles of Scilly, it's not as simple as getting on the plane to go and visit another pharmacy in Penzance or in Helston or wherever else it might be. So sitting alongside the kind of overall P&A report, we've got little profiles for each PCN. So just to say on the headline findings, so the last P&A concluded that pharmacy services were meeting need and there were no gaps. We've seen quite a lot of shift within the pharmacy landscape since that time. So we've seen overall across the whole of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, we've seen 12 pharmacies close. This is actually in line with national trends. There's been we had a sort of increase up to the last P&A, and then since then pharmacies are starting to shut. We've actually had 3 pharmacies open, all in Cornwall, and 38 pharmacies have changed their opening hours. We've actually seen a really significant loss of community pharmacy hours per week, so it's around 20% less now than we had in the last PNA. But we are unique in this part of the world in that we do have a high number of dispensing GP practices, and we have seen a growth of distance selling pharmacies, which currently are not included in the guidelines. So we did add a little box about them, but we recognise there's actually limited data in many cases on how these are meeting people's pharmacy needs. And we've also, I think, a positive to take from the last PNA, we've seen a rise in the range of services offered. So the majority of pharmacies now offer things like the pharmacy contraception service, the pharmacy first service, which is where you can go in for minor conditions. And we also have things like the hypertension case finding service as well. And I think it's continues to be a rapidly changing environment, particularly now with that focus on community-centred services and the Prevent agenda as part of the 10-year plan. And I think we're seeing the ongoing discussions, including, again, Prime Minister's questions about the financial viability of pharmacy moving forward. So I'd expect to see more changes in how we assess pharmacy provision in the future. In terms of gaps and recommendations in the reports, a geographical gap right at this moment in time requiring a new pharmacy was identified in Bodmin. That map on the right actually just shows the extract from the shape tool. And this is walking time for Bodmin, and the pale yellow is 20 minutes, but we've got entire areas of Bodmin that are outside of that walking time. So we've made a recommendation for a new pharmacy there. Applications have actually already come in to meet that need based on the draft report that was put out to consultation. We've also said that we've got gaps in opening times or services that we need secure improvements or better access across parts of Cornwall. We've specifically noted in the current gaps for the Isles of Scilly, we can't consider you having a geographical gap because there's not a we can't make a recommendation for you to have an extra pharmacy given population size and current provision at your pharmacy. But we have noted the challenge with out of hours and off island provision. There was a lot of discussion in the steering group and also received through the consultation about out of hours dispensing out of hours dispensing for your GP practice. We've noted that the GP practice cannot currently dispense out of hours, but we cannot make a recommendation for that to happen because it's out of scope for PNA. It's covered by completely different legislation. So we completely hear that valid comment and we've tried to incorporate it in the best way that we can following the PNA process. And we also received kind of feedback on the contract type for your pharmacy. So there's a kind of additional, there's something called a local pharmaceutical services contract type, which is used for smaller pharmacies. The idea is trying to keep them financially viable in areas of smaller populations. We heard that feedback as well. I think it's also completely valid. That's also out of scope for the PNA, and we've passed that on to colleagues at the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, who are more best placed to work on the kind of terms of contracts under that particular contract type. In terms of future gaps, we can work really closely with planning colleagues and looked at location of major developments. We didn't pick up a future gap due to significant development on the Isles of Scilly, but we did, for example, in Nansledden near Newquay and Redruth, where we've got really, really significant developments on the edges of those towns. We have made a note in the PNA of pharmacies, if they were to close in the future, would create significant gaps. So that includes actually a lot of our more rural locations, Tintagel, Polruan, but also the Isles of Scilly. And the idea of doing that is we're not kind of preempting that your pharmacy is going to close, but we don't want to be in a position where we haven't covered that risk in the PNA, and it means that another contractor cannot potentially put in an application in the future. I think on the consultation, we've said already it went out for that mandatory consultation. We sent the link directly to key stakeholders. That's all pharmacies, all GP practices, clinical directors of primary care networks. It went to members. I think we received a lot of feedback. There was broad agreement with the findings. 48% of people strongly agreed or agree. That is actually higher than the previous PNA. 14% disagreed, with everyone else kind of sitting in the middle. People did provide comments if they did disagree, but these were largely out of scope, and I think it speaks to the limitations of the P&A as a process following those DHSC guidelines. So a lot of things like pharmacy financing and workforce planning, completely valid comments, completely valid, understand the frustrations, but these are kind of governed under national legislation. That point around contract terms for small pharmacies, again, national governance. We had a really fair challenge actually around whether or not we'd adequately considered the pressures of tourism, and this included for the Isles of Scilly. Actually, when we look at all of the dispensing data, including for the Isles of Scilly, winter service activity and dispensing rates are higher, reflecting those wider NHS pressures. And we had a challenge around the information and whether or not it was factually accurate within the P&A on service provision. And just to clarify to everyone here as well, and it's in the report, that comes from national data sets, which are updated by pharmacies themselves. We use those data sets as a consolidated resource of information on pharmacy provision. So I think kind of key messages for everybody. I think the P&A analysis and public consultation has successfully concluded. We have identified those gaps for pharmacies now in Bodmin and in the future in Redruth and Ansledden. We would like to see additional opening hours and services in North Carrier, East and West Penwith and Albanic Health PCNs. And we've noted that Isles of Scilly faces unique access challenges and gaps in out of hours and off island provision. We're just really constrained as to what we can recommend through this process. And we have seen, I think, just to end like on a positive note, I think we are seeing gaps identified being addressed through new applications, which is really positive. The market, which sounds like a very kind of nebulous term, but the pharmacy market has responded positively to the P&A in terms of putting those applications in. So just wanted to say the recommendations, they're in the report, but sorry, it still says committee in common there. I do mean Isles of Scilly Health and Wellbeing Board, my mistake, but that just to say that the Health and Wellbeing Board would be recommend to recognise the findings of the P&A and support the recommendations set out within the P&A to enable publication of this before the statutory deadline. Just to say that deadline was actually in October, and we received an extension due to the elections in May. But happy to answer any questions or kind of comments on the Isles of Scilly pharmacy provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for running us through that. I'm always just conscious that when we're discussing this sort of report, we're talking about identifiable professionals. Over here, I think we have 2 qualified pharmacists, and I think we're all grateful and appreciative of the demanding work they do. My limited knowledge is that, like all pharmacies, they experience financial stress. So I think it's just a branch of our service, a branch of our sort of jigsaw puzzle of life that we shouldn't be complacent around. So I think it's always good to have these sorts of conversations. Chris, I can see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to seize the mic. I do have to drop off in a few minutes, apologies, but I just wanted to thank Beth and the team because I think it's a great piece of work, really, really great piece of work. And there's loads of rich information in it, considering the scope as well that you have to operate under. And what you highlight, but I just want to emphasize on certainly 2 points, sort of the general in relation to Cornwall and then specifically about the Isles of Scilly. So dispensing practices are really important in Cornwall. More than half of GP practice are dispensing. I think the fact the postal service again is outside of the scope is a missed opportunity, because I think there's a really important. It's a bit like not talking about Uber when you're talking about redesigning taxis. It's just you have to talk about postal service because it's a digital application, especially for stable long-term conditions. It can be a really more reliable way and easier way, and actually help with rurality, because actually in transport and all of those and the green. And then linked to that, something that we don't address in this is dispensing intervals. The rest of the world would normally, for stable conditions, give you 3, 4. Going back to New Zealand, they're about to give a 12-month supply for stable conditions, which reduces traffic footprint, creates huge efficiencies, and it doesn't show up against wasted drugs, by the way, for stable conditions. So again, we need to think about dispensing intervals, and that's something relevant, I think, to the Isles of Scilly. And then the biggest thing specifically at Isles of Scilly is you can't look at this in isolation. The colleagues on the Isles of Scilly are doing some amazing work with respect to integrated neighbourhood teams. And I just really want to commend the sort of collegial way that they're starting to think about, instead of SWAST over there and pharmacy over there and the hospital over there, you have the luxury of all of these services, but the fact that they're taking a more of a combined approach means that actually the solution to reliable, resilient access to medication is within your reach. And actually, if you can do it on the Isles of Scilly, what an exemplar for other rural areas. And so just for example, already by that INT approach, the fly-offs have reduced significantly. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to look at making sure we've got resilient access to prescriptions, both acutely and in the stable setting. So thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
That was really helpful to hear. Roy, I think your light was on first in the room.
Beth, you've identified a few things that's obviously outside of your scope in terms of that report and everything else. I think what I just was looking for, because we've got the right amount of colleagues around the screens and everything else, is the reassurance that those things are going to be picked up somewhere else and not just forgotten, because that's a really useful piece of kind of thing. So because that affects the Isles of Scilly really massively, and you've picked it up. I understand that's fallen outside your scope and everything else, but that has been picked up, so something needs to be done about it. And I just wondered what reassurance that we could have that that will get, dealt with somewhere else, wherever that may be. That would be really helpful to understand, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. Sorry, Julia, I saw you've got your hand up. But yeah, no, hear that comment. And I think we did receive a number of comments through the consultation that are out of scope for the P&A, but we have passed on to the appropriate colleagues. And people like the pharmacy experts at the ICB were part of our steering group. So they're the ones that are responsible, for example, for contract monitoring, for contract modalities, for all these different aspects, and the kind of primary care commissioning experts at the ICB, they've also received these comments. We have passed them on. So just to reassure, we didn't listen to comments and then just park them saying out of scope. We directed them to people that should be able to act on them. I do think, as well as kind of mentioned earlier, the P&A as an overall process, I think, is being flagged as a little bit inefficient at PMQs. That's very high level within government. So I think there's a kind of discussion ongoing amongst analysts in the Southwest about how we can flag some of these issues, particularly for rural areas, with the P&A as a process. So I think there's kind of watch this space on a bit more of the feedback on the process as a whole. But just to reassure, we have passed on comments. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I've got a couple of lights on in the room and one on the screen. I just wondered, is it Julia? Was your hand up specifically to that question?
It was actually, thank you. So just building on what Chris was reflecting. So the comments, although they go through the ICB, so I have a foot in the ICB as well as as a convener role for all our other providers around being a place director. So those comments will feed back into that neighbourhood health development to go, so how do we look at that in the round, just as Chris was describing? So I think it's the comments and thinking what else we could do. So one of the things I know has been on the radar is thinking, do we use drone technology? Would that actually support some of that movement of medication? And that's been happening on the Isle of Wight. So that could be a possibility. So I think it's trying to think in that widest scope. What would be the solution for the Isles of Scilly around its uniqueness, and then because actually I think things could be, I think Chris is right, I think there's some solutions that can be working for the Isles of Scilly would actually help for some of the places on the mainland. I think particularly the Lizard and Bude. So I think some of the difficulties are the same there. So it is coming into that neighbourhood health and the integrated neighbourhood team, because all of the elements need to work for the population. So that was all I was going to add, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Peacock, I think your light was first on here.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to pick up on, really, with my CFT hat on, because I'm a governor of CFT, is the fact that I just want to make sure that patients who don't get flown off for medical don't see any problems with medication that isn't available over here that would be available if they would have been flown off. Because I think the whole point of the new hospital, as they're all coming together, is to ensure that we reduce these fly-offs as much. Because if nothing else, it's an emotional issue. You know, I don't want to get personal, but my father was literally a day away from dying. My mother was looking at having to get flown off the islands very, very recently, like last week. Luckily, she pulled through and didn't have to. I don't normally bring emotional stuff into this, but I think it just brings home to me the requirement to try and keep people on these islands as much as we can, not just medically, but emotionally as well, you know, for the patient. So bringing it back into this is to make sure, I think, not to repeat myself, but to make sure that we don't see any issues around what the hospital can dispense that would normally be dispensed intralisc. And I think that's probably a bit of work either is being done or has, I hope, has been done, or hopefully will be done, one of those three. And the only other thing is a bit of a technical question from me. Looking at Appendix 8, I presume the steering group has now finished its work. Is that correct?
Do you want me to jump in on the steering group quickly, Katie, before? Yeah. So the steering group has finished its work in terms of reviewing the pharmaceutical needs assessment. What it will remain kind of connected on is something called supplementary statements. So this is when over the lifespan of a PNA, so until 2028, if we have changes in opening hours or opening of a new pharmacies, so not anything that would create a new gap, we have to issue a supplementary statement, and we will just pass those by the steering group in order to get those published.
Fine. So if that's the case, I'm aware that unfortunately our colleagues from Health Watch are.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, I don't want to. I was looking at him sat next to me. I was going to say the word disbanded, but that seems a bit harsh. We don't know. Under threat. And I would just like to ensure that in the event of Health Watch for the Isles of Scilly disappearing, there is another body that you can connect with as part of the terms of the part of the steering group terms of reference. If they cease to exist, we need to sort of maybe think a little bit about that now, and who perhaps around this organisation would stand up for that.
Yeah, I think that would be appreciated. We do have an officer from the Council of the Isles of Scilly, I believe, Cornwall Council. I'm not quite sure 100% what her role is. She was also part of the steering group, but if you've got an additional person that you would like to include in place of Health Watch, suggestions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Talking of Health Watch, Steve, your light is on.
Yes. One facility has been mentioned, which is postal issuing pharmacy items. Now, that's something which is really very problematical for the islands when we have problems with post and the weather and stuff like that. I mean, it's much safer to get it locally here rather than wait for the post to bring it. And the other thing I will make a comment on is I am continually surprised the number of visitors that end up here having run out of their required drugs. And it just astonishes me beyond that anybody can come away on holiday and not bring the sufficient drugs with them.
Yeah, thank you for that. Katie, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the comments that Juliet had made about the neighbourhood health plans. So we will invite Juliet and probably Chris back to a future health and wellbeing board to talk more broadly about the neighbourhood health plans and what they will mean for the islands. It's potentially quite an, it's an exciting development. It takes things further than what we've been looking at through the INTs, and I think the Isles of Scilly is already leading the way in terms of innovations and the way that it's working, and people are looking in your direction. So there'll be more to read and hear about on that, I think, as we move forward. Welcome Chris's input on that.
If I can just quickly jump in, I suggest Juliet is the lead for the neighbour development, because she is the expert, as it were, for that patch. So I'll support Juliet just for point of clarity, but you're happy with that, Juliet? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that sort of concludes that conversation. Again, just echo that I think we're all appreciative of the work our local pharmacists are doing to support us in challenging logistical times for residents and tourists. So we have two recommendations. Recommendation one, that we as the Health and Wellbeing Board recognise the findings of the PNA, and we as a Health and Wellbeing Board support the recommendation set out in the PNA to enable publication of the report before the statutory deadline. Do I have a proposer and seconder for those, please? Councillor Peacock and Councillor Mumford. I can't see any other abstentions, so that one is carried. So I think our third substantive agenda item is agenda item 6, if I'm correct. A collaborative approach to mental health and wellbeing promotion and prevention of deaths and despair.
Hello everyone, it's Paula here from Public Health. So I've got a presentation to share with you that that Lucy and I will briefly take you through as you have the report there. We won't go through in detail, but we would like to share with you just some of the key points from this. So as you'll be aware, the topic featured within the report is relating to mental health and well-being and suicide also on Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and so there's just to take a moment really to remind everyone to look after themselves, take time out if that's needed, and just know what the support offer that's available is as well. And I'll flash that back up at the end as well, just as a bit of a reminder for anybody that might need that. So as I said, we'll take you through briefly, and just want to start by highlighting actually why it's important that we all do have mental health. It's important that we know how to look after that and take care of that in exactly the same way as it is that we know how to take care of our physical health, and just that sort of reminder that our mental health and well-being is on a spectrum where we can have a mental health diagnosis, a condition, but also still continue to cope really well and have good mental well-being. And conversely, we could have poor mental health and well-being, but without a diagnosed mental health condition, and we can sort of move along that spectrum, and stigma is something that really impacts on that. So when we're talking about preventing deaths of despair, we are also talking about, as well as suicides, we're also talking about deaths that are related to drugs and alcohol. So we know that suicides are rare, but that each is estimated to impact around 135 people on average. That's so that's an average, and that might be really quite different for island communities as well. And so there is acknowledgement of that. But what we've found through our work, we in public health have been working around suicide prevention for quite some time, that preventing deaths is complex. It can't possibly be the responsibility of just one single organisation, and we'll outline a few of the risk and protective factors that we've seen through this work that can help us to understand about how this is a societal challenge. I'm showing on the screen now some rates for suicide for Cornwall, and that comes from the Office for National Statistics data. Isles of Scilly data is not included in that, and the reason for that is sort of relates back to what Katie was talking about earlier about that population level statistics for small populations. But additionally, the ONS does not calculate age standardised rates when there are fewer than 10 deaths, and that is the case for the Isles of Scilly. So they don't produce rates as such. But what we can see from Cornwall is that the line at the top is Cornwall, the one in the middle is for the southwest, and the one at the bottom is for the England averages across those years, their 3-year aggregated rates, and that Cornwall has been significantly higher than both regional and national averages.
Great, thank you. I'll take over from there. So obviously the focus of this is very much suicide, but obviously our work towards suicide prevention really includes our commitment to building emotional well-being and positive mental health. And so what we really focus on is both risk factors that can really impact someone's emotional well-being, and also in that kind of keeping that balance, the protective factors that create the health and well-being, that create a sense of safety. And of course, with regards to the Isles of Scilly, we are really aware that certain risk factors may be more or less impactful. And so we can explore that as part of our work to, yes, the crisis support for suicide prevention, but actually to build in from very young age. So right from our antenatal education, our work with preschoolers and children, our work in schools, to really build emotional health and well-being as a means of preventing suicide. And then if we move to the next slide, I think we often hear about upstream, and that might be something that you've heard, like making sure that we're able to really try and intervene or keep people healthy and well very early before it escalates to more intense and severe distress. And certainly that's what, in terms of our role in public health, is a real focus on prevention. So creating the conditions and the relationships that support all age mental health and well-being, but also being there as well when risk factors may pop up just for a short time, or maybe for a longer period of time, and that we empower people to be able to address them themselves, know that it's okay to ask for support. And our aim is to reduce the people that require that crisis support. But again, even once people have maybe reached that point, for us, it's also critical that when they might have had a period of intensive therapy or support, that when we're really there to support them back in the community to maintain their mental health and well-being. And there's a few numbers there. I think just there was one point to focus on our recognition of babies, children, young people. And again, we've covered the child poverty report. That whole family approach to health and well-being, and particularly mental health, is really crucial. And certainly the work that we do across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly really addresses children's and young people's mental health, addressing that they are very much the centre of a wider world and a wider universe, and that absolutely we have a duty to support them directly, to empower them, to give them confidence and knowledge with resources that they can use themselves, that are accessible and age appropriate, that we really make sure that we have a good support for parents, carers, and the wider family members who are there as a supportive adult. And also a big piece of work is then supporting our professional workforces and our education settings and brilliant community organisations whose role it is to care for children. And they may not necessarily be mental health professionals in a clinical sense, but absolutely their interaction and their relationships with children are key for us to make sure that everyone is contributing to a strong emotional well-being.
So we developed a suicide prevention strategy for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly back through 2021 and into 2022. And I remember bringing that to the Isles of Scilly Council at that point in 2022. And our aim from that was, the overarching aim was to reduce the suicide rate to level with the national average or better by 2027. So we're sort of about midway through the strategy lifespan at the moment, and it looks really quite unlikely that we will achieve that aim. We have seen a reduction in the rate from the most recent release of statistics, but it still looks quite unlikely that that rate will have reduced to that level by then. What we also know about trying to achieve that aim is that it requires a trauma-informed approach across the life course from all services, and those, again, like Lucy mentioned, are not just ones that are focused on mental health support. But because we know that the determinants of suicide often are things such as substance misuse, social disadvantage, it's about housing, it's about access to services, and the consequences of unresolved trauma particularly as well. But we do know that there's a lot of really good progress that's been met on our ambitions that were set out in the action plan that underpins the strategy, and there's better improvement even since the graphic that you can see on the screen there, with progress being met as expected in the vast majority of those actions. So the large majority of prevention initiatives that are available are based on three different aspects of interventions. So that's around improving personal skills and resilience, and that's things like training courses and access to schools-based education. There are activity focused through support and social groups, or they may be interventions such as medical interventions or those that relate to a specific issue, and they are coordinated and accessed through a number of different opportunities. So that can be through statutory services, but also through the voluntary sector as well. And continuing with the idea of just giving you a small taste of some of the ideas that some of the initiatives that are available, and the People in Mind programme, which is a 5-year programme that's jointly funded by ourselves in public health and also our colleagues in the ICB, and it's for people aged 16 plus. It's designed to offer that trauma-informed support that I mentioned before, and it's led by the Voluntary Sector Forum with some voluntary sector partners who deliver on a number of different aspects that we know can contribute to suicide, things like debt, self-harm, social isolation. And so that programme began in 2023 and continues until 2028. And we're starting to see some really great outcomes from that programme already. We've also, so we have a real-time suicide surveillance system, as you'll have seen in the report, that collects information that's available from services that support people prior to their death. But what we also know through this work is that up to around 70% of people who die by suicide are not known to services at all. And so we've been working with some partners to try to explore if AI can help us a little bit with this understanding risk and protective factors around suicide. And on the screen you can see there just an example of one person's story who this work has been generated through it's sort of an anonymized depiction of a person's story, and it's taken from inquest records. So we can see that this gentleman was parented by a parent who had alcohol dependency issues, which is an adverse childhood experience. He then later on in life worked in construction, which we see very overrepresented in suicide rates. He had self-harmed, again another prediction factor for self-harm, for death by suicide. And then later in his life, his partner, of some really a long-term partner, had died. He then had some issues with sleep. And experienced grief and depression as a result. And then on top of that, then he had housing issues where he, very shortly after his partner's death, found that he had to move out of his housing. And he did reach out for some support through social prescribers, but he was actually really quite isolated and didn't have any contact with siblings or friends. And so actually only 1 month after his partner's death, he was also found deceased. And so we can see there sort of a catalogue of those risk factors that were there for this gentleman that might not necessarily have been known to us through services, but they when we start to look at those factors that are available through the inquest process, we can start to see how impactful those kind of things can be. So our next steps following this report are about addressing the recommendations that are within that, and we have been looking at the potential gaps that there are across for interventions across the life course. We in next year's Director of Public Health annual report, there will be a focus on mental health and wellbeing, and we really welcome input from the Isles of Scilly when we are creating and developing the content for that, as well as when we refresh the suicide prevention strategy in 2027. We would really welcome input from the community at that point to really help us to get across that perspective from island communities. And I'll just finish by again showing you the opportunities for seeking support, and welcome any questions.
Thank you both for that presentation, which was thought-provoking. I think, again, my just initial observations and thoughts, so I think it's probably time it came back to full council for that wider exposure and discussion and debate. I know within our corporate plan that we're working on health and well-being, mental health, physical health is part of that. So again, we need to make sure that's included in our thoughts. I was just wondering whether it would be time, and I'm probably thinking, talking to Katie now, a bit of publicity about some of this, and particularly some of the contact details you had on your screen. I know I was in touch with Russell a day or two ago about what the Health and Wellbeing Board does. Perhaps there could be some publicity around mental health and those aspects which we've touched on. I know we did offer some mental health first aid training on Ireland a few months ago, which I think was well received and well attended, so that's a positive. And I'm also just conscious that Christmas is racing up. I don't know, I'm just thinking there might be no statistics or data behind it, but I could imagine that for some people, Christmas is a joyful time, for others it's the complete opposite. So yeah, they're just my thoughts, but I'm happy to hand over. John, I can see your light is on.
Yeah, I think it was unfortunate that I wasn't able to attend that training, and since Joel's brought that up first, I think if that could be maybe done 2 or 3 times a year. And there's also something I think which is quite key to this, is the fact that as employers on the islands, there's a lot of seasonal staff that come in, and I think to tie in that training with the arrival just before those staff arrive, because it's not just the islands overall, like the residents here, you know, our population, I don't know what it is, like let's say 1/3 more people come to work on the islands, and I think picking to make sure that employers are aware of their responsibilities but also their moral obligations around this aspect. And you know, you may well think, well, there's some training available for first aid for suicide, and you think, well, I don't need to do that because I'm quite happy myself. But they are not putting it in the context that it's a requirement as well for their employer-employee relationships, which I think is maybe wasn't picked up at the time. I might be going a little bit off piste here, but that's my sort of general view.
Can I respond to that? Is that okay?
Please do, yes.
So the Healthy Cornwall training program is really quite extensive, and as you say, the mental health first aid is such a great training offer, and they would be more than happy to provide whatever training that was felt that was required, and if we were able to kind of key that up with key dates when seasonal workers are arriving on the island, then we'd be really happy to do that. If you were able to, provide contact details for someone so that we can take that action forward, I'd be really happy to support that action.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford?
Yes, I was going to bring up the training as well. I was unable to attend the last training. I imagine the training includes all the staff in children's and adult services as well. And I know we have a mental nurse, but we don't have a resident one. She's only available sort of virtually or on a telephone. We do have a social prescriber who is very busy, I think. And I just wondered whether there was anything more that could be done there, that we had a resident person to I imagine they're nurses, specialised nurses, are they? The mental ones, mental health. But I think the training is very important, and I think it would be good for all members to attend that training as well.
That was an action that came out of our recent attendance at the committee in common here, is that elected members for Cornwall Council were really keen to uptake that training offer in recognition of the fact that actually if someone wants someone to talk to, it might not be someone within a mental health service. That might be because they can't access that. There might be barriers in their way, but it might also be about the stigma that's attached to recognition of need for mental health support. And so the more people that access that training, the absolute better.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just mindful of one of the recommendation 4 is to do with training, so we'll maybe just explore that in just a minute, but sounds good. Roy, your light is on.
Yeah, now I think we're all coming back to the training aspect of it. I think it is really, really important for the islands. It is about prevention. It is about early identification. It's about that. It's about training up our, not just our childcare staff, but adult and all of that aspect of it. But there are two specifically different type of needs here, because there is a huge children's, again, you know, or things around online, things like all of those things that comes into it. And then there's adult isolation and all of that things that comes into it. But I think there needs to be some training around those individual areas, more specific, because I attended the last one, which was a couple of weeks back that happened, and it was really, really good. It was really taken up, but I think we need some more specific and more frequent of those, because the idea is it's about preventative. We are absolutely need to identify really at an early stage of things that, and the support that goes in stuff like that. So our staff needs to be trained up, not just in children's or adults, but the whole of children workforce and adult workforce on the island.
So from what I'm hearing, this is a challenge almost to our community. It's not just a challenge to professionals, it's a challenge to people who work in the voluntary sector, who work in the professional sector, who whatever. So what I'm hearing is, again, I'm thinking about the children's plan and the corporate plan. We could almost be looking to have an aspiration in both those documents that we train as many people in whatever field and whatever role to try and make Scilly as a more mental health aware community, perhaps.
I agree, Joel. I've just come in there, and I think Russell did contact me to ask about working with Gemma to do something following the Health and Wellbeing Board, and maybe we could do a little call to action around that. I'll have a chat with Paula about what our offer might be able to be, and how we can kind of frame that in. This is what we talked about, and this is what Islanders could do.
That sounds like a good starting point to me. Lucy, I think your hand was up first.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's just a point to note that similar to the child poverty and some of the comments about the framing of gosh, no, the Isles of Scilly doesn't have poverty and nobody has mental illness. And actually, I think we are really careful when we're learning about how we frame things and messages. And you mentioned there that visibility of the topic to your community, absolutely, as well as highlighting those risk factors. What we do need to do is create a sense of positivity and hope. So we also see a huge amount of protective factors from the communities across the islands. And I think that's to balance as well as the risk element. We you know, there's a huge scope to celebrate the joy and the, you know, the actual supportive things that happen on the islands as well. And I think that's something that we try to address is really important.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point to make. Juliet, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just thinking some of the areas that I've seen around compassionate communities, and I think you have that in bucket loads in the Isles of Scilly. But how do we build on that as a collective? So those compassionate community, which would then it's more looking out for everyone without it, and to bringing some of the positivity with it, Lucy, then, rather than it being a very, what can be seen as something quite scary and almost a negative connotation. So I'm just wondering about framing it around that might be useful.
Thank you. That was a really useful, as I said, thought-provoking conversation, I think, which we can take forward in our own ways, with some positive actions emanating from that. I have 4 recommendations, which I'm not going to, well, I will read them out. Members recognise the progress made and ongoing challenges in the delivery of a suicide prevention strategy is recommendation 1. That members support the recommendations set out in the report to ensure suicide prevention is embedded in the system is recommendation 2. That members provide input and feedback on the next strategy when it's presented in draft form at a future meeting, recommendation 3. And that members will commit to accessing mental health and suicide prevention training, recommendation 4. So again, I think the commitment from members in the room on St Mary's today is to support all those recommendations. Do I have a proposer and a seconder to formally adopt them?
Be a pain with recommendation number 4. I wonder if it needs slightly widening. So whether I mean, I'm not good at writing words for this, but the members will commit to assessing mental health and suicide prevention training and endorsing that to other members of the, just to get in there that it's not just the members that want to do with training, we want to make sure that the community does as well, and getting that community aspect in there. I don't know what, sorry Joel, to throw a spanner in the works.
No, so if again, I'm just thinking on my feet, if we reworded recommendation for us that members will commit to accessing mental health and suicide prevention training and promoting this opportunity to the wider community, would that cover that point that Councillor Peacock made?
What about specialist training? I think maybe you were saying that maybe children's services workforce and the adults would have a different training. Is it different for children, for adults? Well, it must be different, mustn't it?
It is, but that can be taken out.
That can be
that
done.
Can be taken outside.
Yes,
for our purpose, I think that covers. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we have a formal proposer and seconder for those?
Yeah, I'll propose that one.
Thank you very much.
Second.
And our final agenda item is agenda item 7, Better Care Fund Report, Quarter 2.
Ben, you're on mute.
Just think I'd be used to that after 5 years. Thank you, Chair. I don't have any slides to share with you today. Obviously, the report is before you today, so I'm here to provide you with detail on the Quarter 2 national return for the Better Care Fund, to seek the ratification of the board for the submission of that return, and I think also to hopefully generate a small degree of conversation in the limited time we have today about what the Better Care Fund for the cities looks like going forward as we come to the end of Quarter 3 of a one-year plan and start thinking about planning guidance that may be released any day now for the future. I'll be very, very brief. I'm happy to take questions on the report. The Better Care Fund is a vehicle through which funds are pooled between the ICB and local authorities, specifically for discharge from hospital and prevention services. Those priorities are set out in national requirements for the fund. The fund that we have locally is a joint fund across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, reflecting the fact that in March of this year, when we had to submit a plan, we had a joint health and wellbeing board. Obviously, the two boards have now sort of distinguished themselves from each other, and that is kind of to my point about thinking about planning for future years. So as things stand, the Isles of Scilly will need to be thinking about what a Better Care Fund specifically for the Scillies looks like with effect from April next year. For Quarter 2, I'm pleased to say that the Cornwall and Scillies plan is performing well. We have 3 national metrics that they're all described at paragraph 5 onwards in the report before you. Whilst we are not on track in one of those, we are very, very short, slightly under where we would want to be in respect to that. That's in respect of avoidable admissions into acute hospitals for over 65s. Despite being off track on our target on that measure, we are the best performing area in the southwest for that particular metric. The other metrics are around the length of delay in discharge, where we benchmark relatively favourably to the rest of the southwest. I think we were 4th or 5th last time I looked. And then the rate of admissions of older people into long-term residential and nursing care, where we are again 3rd or 4th in the region in terms of being the right end of the scale, and we are well on track, I think, to hit locally set targets for the full year. From a spend perspective, the Isles of Scilly expenditure is on track to where I think we would like it to be. There is no significant overspend, something which I can't honestly say about the Cornwall side of the fund, to be candid. We do have some financial pressures in terms of the equipment service on the Cornwall side of the fund, but from a city's perspective, spend is at or below where we'd want to be at the end of Quarter 2 when the report was compiled. As I say, I don't. The national return that I'm seeking the board's ratification of today doesn't go any further than how we're performing in terms of metrics and what our expenditure does, and indeed doesn't break it down to the 2 local authority areas either. So what I think would be a helpful discussion is some guidance from yourselves as the board in terms of both the substance and the mechanics of what a Better Care Fund for Scillies looks like going forward. As I say, from April, there is going to be a requirement for this board to sign off their own Better Care Fund. It may well be
very heavily enmeshed with the neighbourhood health planning that Katie and Juliet have already alluded to today. We await further guidance on that, although it sounds potentially like public health colleagues may have more information about that than I do. So, but as I say, it is going to be a discrete plan for the cities, and I don't, as an employee of Cornwall Council, I need guidance from the Council of the Isles of Scilly as to how you would like that to proceed.
Thank you very much, Ben, for talking us through that. So I'm picking up reassurance that things are going generally well in terms of metrics and expenditures going, so that reassures me. I know we have a budget meeting next week where I think adult social care is going to be a key theme. So although I can't necessarily give you much of a steer today, I think it might be an opportune time for us to build the Better Care Fund conversation into that wider adult social care budget meeting that's taking place. And I think I would also need to get more input from our Chief Exec stroke Section 151 officer and our Director of Adult Services and their team to perhaps liaise to make sure that Better Care Fund is going forward. But at that, I'll leave it and invite other people to comment.
Yeah, we completely agree with your point, Joel. I think, you know, we need to it would be fabulously if we were to lose this money. So we need to make sure it's baked in at this point, and everything we do to, you know, especially as you say, if it's going to split, it's an essential. And I also know, again, anecdotally, but from conversations with people you have around the islands, that there is a significant issue at times with people being discharged. And if this is a way that we can assist those people, that would be, I think, very welcomed by the community. So I think we need to make sure we bottom this one out, please, John.
Yes, I think just, again, although from Sue's perspective in terms of there is a pressure on discharge, there is a pressure on that aspect of things, and sometimes very unplanned. So there is a pressure that's growing. So we would want to monitor that closely and have some say in that, because that is an ongoing issue at the moment.
Ben, did you wish to come back?
I would, thank you, Chair. Thank you. I suppose from my perspective, the reporting and the delivery of the Better Care Fund until now has been very heavily shaped by the kind of the ratio of Cornwall to Isles of Scilly, and that's not to kind of deprecate the significance of the Isles of Scilly one bit. But I don't have the operational knowledge of how things work on the Scillies to really help you develop a Better Care Fund plan. And I suppose at the point that this year's plan was submitted, we had Scott Fuller as the DAS was engaging with us an awful lot, and I suppose as a first step, recognising everything you said about that you need to be thinking about your budget planning process. Is if I could have the board's support in kind of resurrecting the connections with people on the ground in the cities, just to make sure that as planning guidance comes out, I can make sure that the people on the ground who perhaps aren't thinking about this day in, day out like I am are cited on planning guidance and things like that.
Okay. So I think what I think we can commit to do. My colleague on my left is lead member for adults. So I think between myself as vice chair, Avril as lead member for adults, I think we will commit to working with our officers to make sure that there's some sort of connection between what you need and what we need to try and pull that together, if that works for you in the first instance.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Juliet.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to reiterate really that I think Ben is absolutely right. There will be a connection between the evolving neighbourhood plan for the Isles of Scilly and with the Better Care Fund, and it gives you an opportunity. I think one will help shape the other, and Ben, your experience in this is formidable, and I think we will all be leaning on you to have a bit of help and support about how that can be pulled together and knitted together, and anything we can do in that space to support councillors there, you know, please do let us know how the neighbourhood plan and the integrated neighbourhood team can work together to try and help make it as easy as possible, but very focused on the difference it would make for the people of the Isles of Scilly, because that's the whole point of the neighbourhood plan. And some of the focus we've asked the integrated neighbourhood team to look at is around how do we support people to stay on the islands where they don't need to fly off, but also for those people who do need to come off the islands for whatever reason, how do we enable them to get back as quickly as possible with the right support? So I think it all dovetails and knits together, but there is a bit of that neighbourhood plan will link to the Better Care Fund, I think, about how you might want to utilise those funds for particular issues for the people of the islands, rather than perhaps what's been more guided by what's been happening in the wider Cornwall environment. Would that be fair to say, Ben?
It's a good challenge, Julie. I think, in fairness, I think expenditure on the Scillies has always been led by people on the Scillies. It's just simply that the ratio of Cornwall expenditure to Scillies expenditure means that all the focus on monitoring, oversight, metric setting tends to skew very heavily towards Cornwall, and obviously with effect from April that's not going to be the case. So it is really about understanding delivery on the islands and making sure that officers on the Scillies are equipped, empowered, supported to develop and submit and get through assurance a Better Care Fund plan that is, we're not entirely sure what the planning requirements are going to look like at this point.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for your offers of support. As I said, we will try to do all within our power to make sure that that dialogue takes place. We have one recommendation, if there are no other further comments, that members ratify the decisions to submit the formal Q2 return to NHS England for 25-26 for Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Better Care Fund. Do I have a proposer and seconder for that to take place, please? We've got Councillor Peacock and Councillor Mumford supporting that. And I think that concludes our meeting, unless I've missed anything. I can't see anyone suggesting that's not the case. So thank you all for contributing today. It's been a really useful meeting. I think there's certainly actions will be taken forward, but we wish you a good festive period. Thank you very much for your time this morning and this afternoon.
Thank you.